Marlene with Eerie News, and today is April 7th, 2025, Monday, April 7th, 2025. And our first story, like normal, is out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and this is titled The Tomb of the Unknown Boy. The Roaring Twenties are remembered for speakeasies hidden in remote locations or the basement of a building. Slim flappers shimmied while drinking illegal hooch, and gangland killings made the front page of newspapers. But there were other dark deeds being committed, even against the innocent. On March 8, 1921, workman John Burlich discovered the body of a young boy frozen in a pond at the Loveland quarry, now Waukesha Limestone, on the north end of Waukesha, Wisconsin. The body of water was about 100 feet below an embankment. He immediately contacted authorities, who noted that the child was well dressed and appeared well taken care of, which led to the newspapers dubbing him Little Lord Fauntleroy. The Milwaukee police immediately started efforts to identify him. The child was believed to be between 5 to 7 years of age, 3 feet 6 inches in height, long curly blonde hair, brown eyes. He had been struck in the head before being thrown into the water. He had no scars on his body, including vaccination marks. Due to the body being frozen, police could not be sure how long he had been dead. It could range from a few days to 6 months. David Roberts, a jailer at Waukesha, received a telephone call on February 22nd from a man informing him that a boy had been drowned in the North Pond. This was also known as Weber's Pond, which received the overflow from the city reservoir. At that time, he contacted Coroner L. F. Lee, who had the pond dragged without producing a body. Later it was believed the caller had mistaken O'Loughlin Quarry's pond for the North Pond. Mike Cronin, also listed as Mike Coker, a pumpman of the Waukesha Lime and Cement Company, went to the coroner as well with his own strange tale after the discovery of the boy's body. He recounted that 5 weeks before, an automobile pulled up with a young couple. The woman was wearing a red sweater and was crying, and they inquired if a boy about the age of 6 had been seen in the neighborhood. He said no. The man had been looking down into the quarry. Afterward, they drove off in a Ford. Upon hearing the story, the police speculated the couple had met there clandestinely, and they sent the boy out for a walk while they made love. The child fell in and drowned, and because of the circumstances, they failed to report his death. This theory was disproved by the coroner, who confirmed the child had been struck in the head and he had little or no water in his lungs. In other words, he had not drowned. David Dobrik, the owner of the Liberty Department store, told police he was sure the boy's underwear, shoes, and rubbers were sold at his store during a January sale. He remembered so precisely because the clothing was not part of his regular stock, but had been part of inventory bought from another store's bankruptcy sale. The authorities theorized that since the child was wearing summer underwear, he may have been kidnapped during the fall from a nearby city and disposed of in a hurry in the quarry. Another lead came in from Chicago. J.B. Belson told them the child was his nephew, the son of his sister, Mrs. G.E. Hormidge. Her divorced husband had stolen their 2 boys, ages 3 and 5, and many times had threatened to do away with them. Mrs. Hormidge came to see the body, but it was not her boy. Later on, her sons turned up alive in New York. The police decided to allow the area residents to view the body. Then the remains were taken to Milwaukee for a second autopsy, and it was displayed there as well. None came forward to give the boy a name. Rewards were offered as much as $1,000, but still no identification was made. Ultimately, the decision was made to bury the child, and the citizens of Waukesha donated funds to pay for the interment in Prairie Home Cemetery. This effort was spearheaded by Minnie Conrad, who was buried in the same cemetery in 1940 when she was 73 years old. The years passed, and the boy remained unnamed in the small Wisconsin cemetery. The sad incident was forgotten by all until 1948. On June 15th, 1948, Cecilia LeMay lived with her husband, Edmund, in the Milwaukee suburbs. This was the last day her neighbors saw her. 3 months later, Mrs. LeMay's neighbors contacted the Milwaukee police to place a report about the woman's disappearance. It turned out that Edmund Henry LeMay had left Newark, New Jersey for a job promotion and never told police about his missing wife. Not only had he moved, but he had purchased a house with a woman named Eva Clark. She was a widow with a 9-year-old son who had once worked for his wife, Cecilia. Eva Clark, for her troubles, was arrested for driving Cecilia LeMay's vehicle to New Jersey without the owner's permission, but was subsequently released. Initially, she denied a romantic relationship with Edmund, but a letter found by police proved the opposite. She told police that he promised to marry her once he secured a divorce from Cecilia. The same as when he had married Cecilia, Eva provided the bulk of the money to use to purchase the New York home they lived in. A scant 2 years later, in June 1950, Eva Clark died from cancer, leaving Edmund in possession of the property. Without any evidence that Cecilia LeMay was murdered, police instead arrested Edmund on charges of forgery after he had falsified his wife's signature on several checks. When they questioned him about Cecilia's whereabouts, he said that she had walked out on him. He had not reported it because he didn't want to discuss the circumstances where he had failed as a man and his wife had left him. The police department searched all over the United States and could not find any trace of her. Whenever a woman's skeletal remains were discovered, they were immediately examined to verify if they belonged to Cecilia LeMay. None did. This was not the first time a person near to Edmund LeMay had mysteriously disappeared. His child by his first wife, Hazel Case, named Homer, had not been seen since 1921 when he was 6 years old. Hazel herself had died in 1919 from tuberculosis. He told police the child had lived in a Chicago area foster home until adopted by Mr. and Mrs. James Norton. 2 years later, they sent him a newspaper clipping detailing Homer's death after he was struck and killed by a vehicle while they were visiting Argentina. By 1948, the Nortons were both deceased when Edmund told the story to police and could not be questioned about what happened to Homer LeMay. After Hazel's death, Edmund married a woman named Ruby with whom he had 3 children. He met his future wife Cecilia Cebrano, who was a married woman. They each divorced their respective spouses in order to marry. However, his second wife, Ruby, described to police where LeMay had tried various times to kill her. Once he had thrown an electrified cord into the bathtub she was in. She claimed she had narrowly escaped electrocution. He denied her story, saying she had a fertile imagination. They divorced in 1941, and he married Cecilia in 1943. It was during this time that the case of Little Lord Fauntleroy resurfaced, and police questioned if the child was Homer LeMay. In April 1949, Detective Captain Adolph Kramer with the Milwaukee Police Department traveled to South America and could not find any record of an accident or the child's death. Passports were not issued for the Nortons or a child in 1921. On October 8, 1948, the same body of water where the child's body was found in 1921 was dragged with the hope of finding Cecilia LeMay's body. There was discussion of exhuming the boy's remains, but it never took place. Cecilia LeMay was never found, and by 1955, Edmund LeMay received her estate after she was declared legally dead, since 7 years had passed since her disappearance. During those years after the boy was buried, Minnie Conrad would bring flowers to Homer's grave, but there was also sightings of a heavily veiled woman who would occasionally place flowers on the boy's tomb. Some have speculated that this woman knew the actual identity of Little Lord Fauntleroy. Did Edmund LeMay get away with murder? Not once, but twice? Did he, instead of turning his obviously unwanted son over to foster care, kill him in anticipation of or after his wife's death? The answer lies in a corner of Prairie Home Cemetery under a simple tombstone that reads, "Unknown boy found in a Loveland quarry, Waukesha, Wisconsin, March 8, 1921. Little Lord Fauntleroy was not the last unknown to seek eternal peace in Prairie Home Cemetery. In 1977, an unidentified woman was found buried about 25 feet from his grave. An unidentified woman was buried about 25 feet from his grave. She was found on April 3, 1976, in a field east of the cemetery. A skull and upper arm, all that's left of the woman, was buried in a child's coffin. The burial ended 1.5 years of searching for her name. No other bones were found. The coroner believed the remains were in the ground for about 10 years and belonged to a woman about 30 years of age. Unlike Little Lord Fauntleroy, no marker was placed over her grave. So here we have a child that's been dead over 100 years. Um, and if they did DNA, if they ever want to establish, Edmund LeMay had 3 kids with his wife Ruby, so maybe they have family where they could do a DNA comparison. And if that was, and in other words, if there was a correlation between the dead boy's DNA and LeMay's descendants, well, that goes to show that that's what happened to Homer. And how convenient, which for some reason I don't understand. He gives his son away to foster care. He's adopted and then dies in a weird accident in Argentina. But then there's no record of the Nortons are dead, and there's no record of them going to Argentina or any accident. I think that poor boy was done away with, whether he's this one or not. And that Edmund gets all his dead wives, their estates. Okay, next story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and this is titled Incan Reign of Terror. In the Andes foothills sits the ancient Incan village known as Iglesia Colorada. It is tucked in the Atacama Desert, one of the driest regions of the world. From the late 1400s to early 1500s, the Incan Empire expanded its reach through war and conquest. It believed the inhabitants of the village resisted their conquerors and for their troubles were killed and their skulls used during the Inca's reign of terror. The Inca seat of power was far removed from Cusco. However, the rebellious locals from Copiapo Valley, Chile, knew how to survive in the harsh environment, giving them an advantage over the Incas. So not only was physical submission imposed on them, but psychological as well. This was one of the ways the Incas, who only numbered 100,000 persons, held power over a conquered empire that numbered more than 10 million people. Talk about a psyop. Remember how many more people there were than the Incans. In 2003, 4 skulls were found in an ancient garbage dump that was part of a pre-Hispanic village. There were no bodies, jewelry, or other adornment found with them. The village had an official cemetery where entire skeletons were unearthed. None of the remains were decapitated. It was a mystery why these 4 skulls were thrown away in the rubbish heap. And of course, where the rest of the bodies were at. In 2018, 2 researchers at the National Museum of Natural History in Santiago, Chile, postulated that these skulls were actually strung up by the Incas as a warning to other villagers. The age of the skulls date back to the time when the Inca were subjugating the area. The study's authors, Francisco Garrido and Catalina Morales, argue that these skulls was when the Inca resorted to violence to terrify villagers into submission. All the skulls had holes drilled in them and marks found around the jaw, which indicate they were flayed. The holes were probably made to string them up on a rope so they could be exhibited to the village. Based on their bone density, all 4 were malnourished. 3 belonged to a young woman and 1 to a child. Garrido explained that young males were too valuable as laborers and warriors. Early colonial missionaries wrote about this practice throughout Mesoamerican and South American cultures. For many years it was believed they exaggerated or purposely lied in order to vilify the indigenous cultures of these areas. However, recently archaeologists such as John Reinhardt have begun finding the bodies of sacrificed children on mountaintops who have been mummified due to the dryness and cold temperatures where they were left. The remains are in direct contrast to the 4 skulls found in the village's rubbish heap. The Incan practice of human sacrifice is known as Oaxaca. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Their favorite victims were children between the ages of 6 to 15. They were chosen because of their innocence. Only ones in perfect health and without any blemishes could be presented to the gods. Months before their deaths, They were fattened and dressed in fine clothing before being trekked up the highest mountain tops by priests. They were fed coca leaves to enable them to reach the highest summit without expiring. They were then given a drug drink to allow the priest to strangle them, deliver a blow to the head, or leave them to die of exposure without resistance, the regular response to a human being murdered. The mummy of El Plomo Boy, discovered in 1954, was one of several children that had been discovered on the highest peaks, killed as messengers or to appease the gods. In other words, the Incas, they were known to sacrifice children, which there's various mummies that they have found way, way up on those, one of the tallest Andean peaks. And they were stringing up these skulls. Remember, they could tell these skulls were malnourished women and children, but the local populace, they just saw skulls up there. It could be any of them, as basically as a psyop. If you don't do what we tell you, this is what's going to happen to you. So there you go. In other words, and of course, by contrast, when they were going to prepare a child for sacrifice, the child was well taken care of and fattened up and everything. And these others, on the contrary, they were malnourished. So they were conquered. They were conquest. They had been conquered by, when they went into Chile, into the Atacama. And when they talk about that, the people of that area, remember, this is the Atacama Desert, is one of the driest places on earth. And the people that lived there knew how to live in that environment. And I think this maybe wigged the Incan out a little bit, because obviously knowing how to survive in that environment was a big advantage. But there you go. Okay, next story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories is Legends of the Lighthouse. The Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse sits on a piece of land replete with history and colorful legends. It was completed in 1860, and thousands of visitors have crossed its threshold through the years. Many of them have reported hearing strange noises and feeling cold spots while climbing the 100-foot spiral staircase. Others felt hands touching their shoulders when there is no one behind them. The sandy beach near Jupiter Inlet has sheltered humans dating back at least 5,000 years. The Hopi and Jiaga tribes carved canoes from the abundant cypress trees to fish the ocean and river. They traveled throughout South Florida and made their way to Lake Okeechobee using the river system. They built shell mounds, and archaeologists have found pottery and stone, shells, and bone tools. Their main village of Hopi sat directly across the inlet, and archaeologists discovered artifacts in the lighthouse grounds themselves. After the arrival of Europeans, they salvaged precious metals and goods from the ships that wrecked along the coast due to the hurricanes and the effects of the Gulf Stream. They are believed to have died out or merged with other tribes in the 1700s. In 1696, Jonathan Dickinson shipwrecked on Jupiter Island after a hurricane, and this was his experience with the Indians. Quote, he and his 23 shipmates encountered the Jaga from Jobi, or Hobe, who relieved them of their clothes and possessions. They were held hostage in the village for a few days until the Jaga allowed them to walk north along the beach, where they were met by the Santa Luces at the St. Lucie River and the ice near present-day Fort Pierce. Early on, Dickinson learned that the Jaga, Santa Luces, and Ace hated the English, but feared the Spanish. It would be a death sentence if any of them spoke English. So they secretly delegated all communication with the tribes to Solomon Cresson, who spoke fluent Spanish. 5 members of the castaways died from exposure, but the rest made it to safety by trekking over 200 miles to the Spanish fort in St. Augustine. Jonathan Dickinson later became mayor of Philadelphia. End quote. In the 1760s, there was an attempt to establish a plantation on the north shore of Jupiter Inlet, but it failed when Sir George Grenville died in 1770. Fragments of British pottery have been found around the lighthouse. In the early 19th century, the U.S. Army established Fort Jupiter, west of the lighthouse, to aid in the battles fought in the Second and Third Seminole Wars. Soldiers stationed there suffered from what they dubbed Jupiter fever, believed to be a form of malaria. In 1849, Lieutenant Robert E. Lee surveyed the area for potential military use but found the inlet too shallow. In the 1850s, Jupiter Inlet stretched away with no warning light for approaching boats. Lighthouses already shone from Cape Canaveral and Hillsborough Inlet. 3 years later, a tall sand dune was chosen as the building site for a lighthouse. In 55. Just as construction on the tower had started, a group of careless surveyors in the Everglades destroyed the prized banana plants of Chief Billy Bowlegs, touching off the Third Seminole War. In 1859, a two-story house was built for the head keeper and the assistants near the base of the lighthouse. It was constructed of coquina, and a well was dug inside so the occupants would not have to leave in case there was more trouble with the Indians. The 108-foot structure, the adjacent oil house, and keeper's house were completed in less than a year, and the light from the tower first shone out on July 10, 1860. During the Civil War, those sympathetic to the Southern armies disabled the light, and it became inactive. Smugglers and blockade runners for the Confederacy used the site to hide from Union gunboats. A yellow fever outbreak forced the USS James L. Davis to abandon blockade duty off the Jupiter Inlet. It was not until 5 years later that the light on the tower was relit. Captain James A. Armour recovered the missing light in a palmetto hammock near Lake Worth Creek. In 1866, he was appointed as assistant keeper at the lighthouse, and the following year he brought his bride, Almeida Carlyle, to live there. Together they had 8 children. The eldest, Catherine, went on to marry Joe Wells, and they lived there with their children. Starting in 1869, James Armour served as a head keeper for 40 years. Until 1939, more than 70 different keepers served there, until it merged with the Coast Guard. It was automated in 1987. The following is a story about a modern encounter with something that chooses to haunt the tower. Quote, when my friends planned a weekend trip to see the one in Jupiter, I was actually pretty excited. We found a nearby campsite the night before and spent the night partying. None of us were feeling especially well the next morning when we set out to see the lighthouse. I felt sick when we arrived, so I told my friends to start the climb without me and that I would catch up with them in a bit. They opened a large metal door and began to climb up Jupiter's long flight of stairs. I finally started to feel like myself when I heard my friends' voices grow loud within the lighthouse. Their footsteps grew loud too and suddenly picked up their pace. I could tell that something was wrong. They came tumbling out by the time I reached the door. Each of them looked a bit pale and were out of breath. What's with you guys? I asked, looking from one frightened face to the next. I think there's something up there, my friend Monica whispered. What do you mean? She means that we felt a presence, supplied Mary. I looked at them all and laughed my butt off. As in, you think it's haunted? I scoffed. It's an ancient lighthouse, you guys. It's going to be noisy, especially on a windy day like this. Okay, then you go up there, snapped Monica. So I did. I began to climb the metal stairwell, still amazed at my friend's behavior. The air grew colder as I climbed, but that was to be expected. My stomach was in knots, but that was also not surprising. And I almost reached the top when an apparition appeared 3 steps above me. A tall figure formed out of white mist within seconds. I could make out 2 dark eye sockets and a gaping mouth, but the lower half of its body remained a white mass. He reached a bony, large hand to grab me when I fainted and started to fall down the stairs. When I woke up, my friends were gathered all around me. My experience was so frightening at Jupiter that I haven't been to another lighthouse since. End quote. Adjacent to the keeper's house is a small graveyard. Joseph Wells and his wife Catherine buried their stillborn children in this small plot of land. Life was difficult here, and so much took place on this piece of land that it's no surprise many experienced unusual encounters. Here are more ghost stories. Quote, I was driving home because I was working late at the Jupiter Police Department. It was about 11:30 and I was really tired. About 10 minutes away from home, my patrol car stopped. I put on my warning lights even though there were not many cars on the road. I then called on my radio for any backup to help me out. I just heard static. Then with nobody to help, I went to the front to check out the engine. Just then, an old antique car came driving down the road without headlights on. Since I thought it was coming to help, I wouldn't charge them for driving without headlights. I ran inside my patrol car to call dispatch to tell them I'm okay. When I lifted my head, the old car was gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Nothing. 1 second it was coming to me, the next second it was gone. I turned my lamp on and it shone it around. Nothing there. I sat down and closed the door, trying to think about what happened. My engine then turned over and the car started up. To this day, I still never figured out what happened. Next story. Last year, I visited my Aunt Fran and her daughter Faye who live on a farm in Jupiter. They have a lab pup named Bandana. The first night I was staying there, Bandana was whimpering like mad. I walked up to him to see what was up, and I saw a man with a backpack and a knife in his hands. When he saw me come, he vanished. I told Faye. She's a good ghost hunter, and she has all the equipment. She checked the whole barn and house, but didn't find anything. Was this a ghost that followed her home? A good question. Next story. I lived in a house close to Jupiter for 4 years. This was a duplex neighborhood. I slept in the loft upstairs, but I was able to see everything that went on downstairs. One night, my two cats were in the living room right below me. My dog was in my mom's bed. Then I heard a rattling of the glass cups in the kitchen. I thought it was my cats, but clearly it wasn't. Then I saw one of my cats slowly walk into the kitchen, then run back out like something spooked him. He probably scared himself, but then, sometimes, I would see him playing with something in the air. Another day, my grandma was home alone and heard someone call her name. She yelled out, "Hello," and quickly called my mom, who was cleaning the house next door, crying because she was scared. Then I started to take pictures with my friend one day because we were bored, and in the camera I saw little bubble looking things. I showed my mom, and she said those were orbs. We were all freaking out. We asked the neighbor across the street if anything had happened, and he said a 21-year-old killed himself over his girlfriend who broke up with him. He said that it happened in my mom's room. If you looked, you see a cutout in her carpet where the blood was at. I was so scared because I have a fear of spirits and stuff like that. That was when I had a dream of a 21-year-old boy, and he said he needed me to find his girlfriend in order to pass on. In my dream, on the door of my grandma's room, there was a picture of his girlfriend, and he smiled as he stepped out, and they went up to the light together. This is all true. Next story. 2 years ago, I moved close to Jupiter. Me, my mom, my dad, and my brother. One day, I was in my room watching TV, and then I heard my mom say to me, "James, turn off the TV. It's time for you to go to bed." I said, "Okay, Mom." I was going to turn off the TV, and it turned off by itself. So I turned it on again. It turned off by itself. I ran to my mom and told her that this house is haunted. She didn't believe me. I was scared to go to sleep, but I was so tired I finally did. At 12 a.m., I woke up to go to the bathroom. I saw the light turn on by itself. I was like, this house is really haunted. So I went back to my room. When I was in the room, I did not see my pillow. I thought to myself, I'm really confused. Then I heard a voice that said, "I got your pillow. If you want it, come and get it." I asked, "Who's that?" The ghost said, "It's me, your friend." It sounded like a girl, and I said, "Please, can you let me see you?" All she said was, "You cannot tell anyone about me." I agreed and went to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, my mom said she was going to look for a job. After she left, I tried to talk to the ghost, but I didn't hear anything. When I went to my room, I saw a little girl inside of my room. I yelled. She said, "I was talking to you last night, remember?" I asked where she came from, and she said, "This is my house." When I asked her about her parents, she said, "They're standing behind you." I turned around, and they were there staring at me. I yelled and ran from the room. I never slept in there again. I just stayed on the couch. We moved away from there not too long after. Thank God. So again, that's what I'm saying. A lot of things go on sometimes in the land and places before you actually see the construction of a house. Things happen. Okay, then this other story is from How Stuff Works, and it's titled "The Loveland Frogman." By any other name is still a cryptid. The Loveland Frogman is a legendary creature said to lurk near the Little Miami River region, 15 miles outside the city limits of Cincinnati, Ohio. Reports of this bizarre being describe a frog-like humanoid monster standing roughly 4 feet tall on its hind legs, with large reptilian eyes bulging from a round, scaly head. The Loveland Frogman has been a part of Ohio folklore for decades, with sightings dating back to the 1950s. Some witnesses claim the creature has magical abilities and can even emit sparks, while others believe it's simply a misidentified animal. The legend has captured the imagination of cryptid enthusiasts, inspiring everything from local t-shirts to eerie camp stories. So, is this a new kind of rare, unidentified amphibian species? Or is it just another cryptid legend? The first well-known sighting of the Loveland frog occurred in 1955, when a man driving near the Little Miami River reported seeing three strange beings standing by the roadside. He described them as humanoid, but distinctly frog-like, with webbed hands and leathery skin. Once the eyewitness tried to get closer to the scene, the frog creatures quickly disappeared into the night. Over the years, additional reports surfaced, keeping the legend alive. Some claim the creature was closer to a lizard, leading to the alternate name Loveland lizard. However, the most famous encounters were yet to come. One of the most well-documented sightings involved a Loveland police officer in 1972. The officer reported seeing a large frog-like creature jump across the road on its hind legs before disappearing into the water. In a similar event just a few weeks later, another officer, Mark Matthews, later shot and killed what he believed was the Loveland frog, but he later recanted, saying it was a large iguana that had lost its tail. Despite this explanation, the legend persisted. The idea that a mysterious amphibious humanoid may inhabit Ohio waterways continues to fascinate cryptid hunters. The legend of the Loveland frog saw renewed interest in 2016 when Sam Jacobs and his girlfriend claimed to have spotted the creature while playing Pokemon Go near the Little Miami River. According to Jacobs, he saw a giant frog that stood up on its hind legs in the water and stared at them with large glowing frog eyes for a moment before quickly disappearing. An encounter eerily similar to earlier reports. The teens captured some dark and grainy video footage on their phones, although when the still photo was enhanced and studied, it appeared to be an attempted hoax. These sightings reignited interest in the Loveland frog with cryptid enthusiasts, and Ohio locals once again leading the town to adopt a Frog Prince mascot in 2023. And you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of the Lovecraft stories of these villages, the Dagon and Arkham and Miskatonic, where, these little New England towns are populated by, uh, I want to say like offsprings or frog people or something like that. That's when I read that. I was like, well, maybe this is where. Well, no, this Lovecraft was way before that, but yeah, yeah. If you read some of Lovecraft stuff, that's what he talks about: reptilians or many times frog-like beings or descendants, that kind of thing. There's a story in the town that some men or some they got together with these women who had these frog-like features, kind of deal. I'm telling you that Lovecraft was way out there. So anyway, guys, I hope you like this last set of eerie news, and I will be back soon. Never fear. Till next time.